Thousands of people have been protesting the passage of the bill outside the country's parliament. In fact, there are lots of pictures of it playing on our TV screens at the moment. Let's speak to Gabriel Gavin, a Politico reporter who's outside with the demonstrators. Gabriel, welcome to the show.
Good afternoon. Thanks for having me back on.
Yes, in fact, I can see you, and I can hear the demonstrators. Tell us just briefly what is in this bill that has caused this reaction?
Yeah, well, look, I've had to just step away from outside Parliament, where just a few moments ago, Georgian lawmakers have signed off, given the final vote in favour of a foreign agent law that would effectively require any NGOs, campaign organisations, anti-corruption watchdogs, independent media outlets that receive more than 20% of their funding from abroad to declare that they're agents of a foreign power. Now, obviously, the government says that's essential to protect its independence and sovereignty as a country. But the NGOs I've spoken to, the campaigners I've spoken to, they say, we're not foreign agents, we're patriots. And this is exactly what Russia has done in order to suppress dissent domestically there. And they don't want to be like Russia and Georgia, having fought a war with the country in 2008 and having gone so far down the process towards joining the European Union.
So what does this mean in terms of Russian influence on Georgia? Because Georgia is one of the countries that could potentially join the EU. Presumably, Putin and the Russian government are trying to hem Georgia in more and more.
Well, look, I think nobody knows what conversations have been had behind the scenes, but I think it's increasingly clear that Russia is extremely happy about this bill because the EU has made it very, very, very obvious that it drives a wedge between Georgia and the European Union. Just in December, Georgia was granted candidate status in a really historic decision that recognized the fact that about 80% of people in this small South Caucasus country consistently say they want to join the EU. They want to be part of an integrated Europe. And this bill, according to Brussels, will drive a wedge between the two and is entirely incompatible with European values, was the words used by the EU's top diplomat, Josep Borrell, just the other day.
In fact, I could see a European Union flag behind you, and many of the demonstrators are wrapped in European Union flags. Is the government trying to move Georgia away from the European Union? Is it a Russian-friendly government?
Well, the government maintains that it wants to join the European Union by 2030. But obviously, the EU has been the first to say that won't happen if you pass this bill. And yet the government has continued undeterred. And what we've actually seen is since the start of the war in Ukraine, Georgia hasn't got further away from Russia politically. It's actually tightened its relations. It's built economic ties. Travel between Russia and Georgia is now easier than it used to be. And you go up just a few hours from where I'm standing in the capital, Tbilisi, to the border with Russia, and you just see truck after truck after truck of goods, going across the border into Russia. You have vehicles carrying luxury cars, to fuel Russia's, elite economy. And as a result, there are real questions about where this country wants to be in the world. And obviously, the young people who have grown up, not learning Russian, not being part of the Soviet Union, they're very clear that they believe their future is with Brussels, not with Moscow.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Gabriel Gavin, for coming on the show. Politico reporter talking about the extraordinary situation in Georgia, extraordinary and very worrying. In Georgia, we've got two TV screens in the studio, and they are showing, it's been showing throughout the show how things have been developing. You've had demonstrators hacking at what are kind of metal security fences, the kind of temporary metal security fences you see put outside building sites or condemned buildings, but they've been surrounding the parliament in Tbilisi. A lot of the protesters wearing goggles and quite a few wearing gas masks, some are wearing police helmets. They've clearly come sort of prepared to be, how can I put it, attacked or contained by the police. And then I noticed a row and row and row of policemen in kind of black tracksuits, not kind of formal riot gear, but black tracksuits and hoodies, some of them wearing caps saying police, and literally standing in a row about 10 deep right across the road. So clearly acting as a kind of human barrier. I also gather that water cannon have been brought into the main square. I haven't seen whether they've been used yet. And there are lots of journalists for some of the broadcasters kind of on the ground reporting live. And we've got Gabriel Gavin here from Politico. We spoke to him in the last hour. Let's speak to him again now to get a live update. Thank you for joining us again, Gabriel.
Georgia's national parliament is based, and huge crowds had formed outside the building, blowing vuvuzelas, whistles, banging pots and pans together, trying to make their voice heard, their noise heard inside the parliamentary chamber. However, the governing Georgian Dream Party, which has brought forward this law, has been able to pass it now at the third reading, effectively paving its way for this extremely controversial bill to become legislation. And just in the last few moments, we've seen the riot police, which have already used tear gas, batons, and riot shields to try and disperse the crowd. We've now seen them trying to clear the entire area from demonstrators.
How many people do you
actually
estimate
pushing them all the way down the street outside?
How many people do you estimate are out on the streets?
I think, well, personally, I'm always skeptical when people say, "Oh, it's 1 million people out on the street," because it's really difficult to know. We have seen 10,000s. I mean, I think 30, 40,000 at various points during the last few weeks of protests would be even an understatement. But the thing that really amazes me when I speak to people is just how dogged they are. So actually, I think there was probably only about 10,000 people, but then it was only about 4:30 here. So a lot of people are still at work. A lot of people are coming down. A lot of people are coordinating. And what they've done that's absolutely amazing, that's hard to think of, parallels elsewhere, is just day after day after day, standing in the drizzling rain, banging a pot and pan, saying, this is not what we want for our country. And I think that's really, really surprising.
And the demographic as well is very mixed. I mean, from what I could tell, it was young and old standing shoulder to shoulder.
There's very few people in Georgia who don't remember the 2008 war with Russia. There's very few people who want their countries to a closer relationship with Moscow. And, opinion polls show that around 80% of the country consistently says, we want to join the EU. That's where our future lies. So as a result, yes, the protests are naturally going to always bring, primarily a younger urban population. They're the people who want to, leave the apartment and go and protest on a Thursday night in the rain at 6 p.m. But actually, there is a real cross-cutting demographic, and I think it really reflects this broad support for joining the EU.
Yeah, well, I mean, I can see on the TV picture a young girl standing in front of these rows of hooded policemen with a Georgian flag and a European flag sewn together, and she's standing in that way that people sometimes do when they put flowers in the rifles of soldiers and so on. You stand in front of the ranks of policemen, showing your views, but doing so peacefully, so as not to provoke them. Do you think the riot police are going to end this demonstration today, or do you think it's going to carry on? I mean, how are the authorities handling it? I mean, it seems an odd way to say, are they handling it sensitively?
Just 2 weeks ago, I was standing outside the Georgian parliament where they first used force to disperse the protests. We were tear gassed, we had to run away from the police. Now, over the last couple of days, I have to say the situation has really dramatically escalated. Opposition politicians, even academics, have been basically pulled out from around their homes by groups of thugs and beaten, physically assaulted. The family members of politicians being assaulted, physically assaulted. It's reminiscent of something that we've seen in Belarus or in Russia. I actually, just before I was coming on to speak to you, less than an hour ago, I was trying to find a spot to give you some good video from Rustaveli Avenue where the parliament is. And I was surrounded by 4 guys dressed in black with black face masks on, trying to take pictures of me, to intimidate me, to try and stop me from doing my job. And the second I spoke English and said, I think I said something along the lines of, if you print one out, I'll sign it for you, jokingly, obviously. They immediately went away because they realized I'm not Georgian. I'm not worried about my family being attacked. I'm not worried about being exposed in front of my community as, a quote unquote traitor to my nation. And actually, I think it's the Georgian activists who, and indeed journalists who have just day after day braved beatings and tear gassings that will, either win this or lose this. It's fundamentally, it's fundamentally now a battle of attrition between the will of people to drive their country in one direction and the will of the government to drive it in another.